Welcome to the Excellence in Enterprise podcast, where I reach out to people I do not know, engage with friends, all for the purpose of learning about them, learning about what they care about, why they care about what they're doing, what they're engaged with from across multiple different industries and multiple different vantage points and viewpoints, all for the purpose of increasing my personal knowledge and kind of thinking outside the box when it comes to my work, my professional career. I want to draw from those sources, and I thought you might be interested in hearing as well. So I hope you will join me on this journey. You can find me on YouTube, on Spotify, on Instagram, and on Twitter. Feel free to reach out anytime. I'd love to engage with you, and I hope you enjoy this podcast interview engagement journey with me. Okie dokie. All right. Well, welcome to episode number 5. This is with my friend, Jeremy Tjia. We've known each other for, I want to say 9 years now, right? Because I think,
9 years.
Yeah, crazy.
Baby.
That's crazy. We were suite mates in college, and then we were roommates in college, and then we were roommates kind of sort of during the summer, shortly after, or I guess junior year of college. And then he moved away to do other things, and I stayed in DC. Now he lives a few hours away, but we stayed connected. And what I thought would be kind of interesting is we spent a ton of time, probably hundreds, if not thousands of hours talking about all kinds of stuff. But one of the things we've talked the most about is mentality and personality and kind of managing of ourselves and our circumstances. And so I wanted to focus specifically for this episode, which that may mean it ends up being a shorter episode, but wanted to focus specifically on the kind of the mentality aspects of like how we approach our mentality and how we think about mentality and how we've discussed and even encouraged each other in our mentality in times past. So that's kind of the goal for this discussion. But before we get into the episode, for those of you watching on YouTube, if you would consider liking and subscribing, that would be fantastic. It helps with the algorithm and it is very encouraging. And so we'd love to see that. And if you're listening on a different Spotify or Apple Podcast platform, then please consider going and leaving a review. That would be phenomenal. Thank you so much for everybody listening and for your support. I appreciate it. Jeremy, before we get into the first question that I had for you, I need to get you some chosen candles, man. You need them in your little office there. I got mine burning right here, but I need to get you some.
It's only a matter of time before I put my first order in.
Yeah, I'll send you one or something. But all right, first question that I had to kind of kick us off is if you had to name one thing, and it doesn't have to be super specific, but if you had to name one thing, whether it's a person, a book, an article, a circumstance, whatever it is, if you had to name one thing that has had the most impact on your mentality, and which is to say for those listening and watching, when we're talking about mentality, we're thinking about our approach to our life and who we want to be and how we conduct ourselves in our professional and personal lives. And so, so back to the question. If you had to pick one thing that has had the most impact on your mentality, what would you say it is?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure, to recreate many of these conversations. Putting aside all of the normal suspects, because I feel like if I don't give them a shout out, then I'll get slammed. So, like family, faith, community people, like all of that, the community supports, shout out to all of them. But if we're talking about like external factors, heroes, that kind of thing, which is like the first thing that comes to mind for me, it would probably be Kobe Bryant. I was I am still a huge basketball fan. I bleed purple and gold. I grew up in LA. I actually don't remember the first time that I picked up a basketball, and like that was some of my, sweetest childhood memories. Actually, it was just sitting with my mom, before my sisters came around. Not that my sisters aren't great, but we would just
but they ruined the memories. What can you say?
No, we can't say that on air, live on air. But yeah, I've been a huge Laker fan, so and right around the time that I started watching basketball was around the Shaq and Kobe area.
Gotcha. Okay. And what about Kobe's mentality, or what about Kobe himself? And obviously, rest in peace and all that. What about his existence? What about his existence impacted you? Like, why was it Kobe and not Michael Jordan? Why was it Kobe and not some book you read? Like, when you think of Kobe, why are you thinking of Kobe?
Well, first of all, it's probably because, like, again, he is what I remember from my childhood. So, there's a huge Michael Jordan and Kobe debate. In fact, probably most people on the web today giving basketball commentary would say there's not even a debate because it's just definitively settled in favor of MJ. Putting aside all of that right now, like I grew up watching Kobe, and Michael was already toward the end of his career by the time I was watching live basketball. The thing I got the most was, I mean, I loved how he was just an amazing athlete when he came in, right? Like he was one of the first who came straight from high school, unbelievable talent. But I mean, he didn't just stop there, right? Sometimes it feels like watching enormously talented individuals, and maybe I can even experience a little bit of that. Like sometimes being smart can be your biggest handicap because you just kind of chill and cruise. And he like did not do that. He had some of the greatest basketball players of all time talking about his work ethic and his unbelievable workouts. And over time, like there were these heartbreaking moments in like, 04, 05, where like, he would get somebody up for a pump fake and they would come down on his shoulder and Kobe would be out. So like his career had tons of adversity, lots of injury, lots of extra career um, barriers, if you will. And over time, he's just developed, what a lot of basketball people will know as the Mamba mentality, right? And we can, go into that more. But that's the mentality is really what set him apart for me.
Okay. And then how, in what ways have you felt that impact you and your mentality? And what are, or maybe even more specifically, what are elements from his mentality that you have kind of drawn and tried to make part of your mentality? Because obviously you're a different person, different personality, or we all are. So what are the elements that you've drawn specifically from him and tried to make yours?
I think in the beginning, like around high school, is when I first started participating in like intramural, some sort of competition, like pure against pure competition.
Mhm.
So, which was competitive speech and debate, which is really funny because that probably paints me as a geek. I do have a backstory for that. Not that I'm ashamed of my speech and debate background, but when I was 14, well, maybe I should back up. When I was like 12, I got my growth spurt before all my friends. So I was like a head taller than everybody, and I was convinced I would make it into the league. So when I was 14, I was like trying to convince my mom to let me play high school competitive basketball. And she let me try out, and I did okay. And she said, okay, well, I don't think you're going to keep growing. So I'm going to put you in speech and debate instead of basketball. And I was like, oh, what? So it turned out she was right. I stopped growing and everybody else caught up. So, good call on her part. But that was the first type of activity where I remember thinking, like, okay, I don't have basketball, but I have this thing that I am decent at the beginning, but that I can I can get really good at this if I want. And so I kind of decided to myself after my first tournament that like I would invest heavily into the activity. And so, for those 4 years of high school, and I've maintained some level of competition ever since then through like law school and college. Um, I guess that was the most direct parallel, right? Because Kobe was competing in basketball. I was competing not in basketball, but in a different type of activity.
Mm-hmm. So like those are totally hear what you're saying, and I think like those are the things that you were doing per se and competing, but I think there's more to it in that there were and or are specific elements of the Mamba mentality that I think you've thought about in the past and were applying to your circumstance. And so I think even to try and take it a step deeper or further, I'm curious what you would say are elements of how he thought that you applied to how you thought through difficult circumstances or situations or whatever it may have been, versus just versus just having a comparison between both of you being in competition or in your respective fields. Because obviously lots of people are in competition in their respective fields, but there are still like people that have endeavored to either have successfully stood out like Kobe, and then there's other people who have it, or at the very least endeavoring to stand out like yourself, like myself, and then there's people that are trying to figure that out, and to some extent even those that are trying to figure it out. And then there's those people that don't think about it at all, which is totally fine. I think different personalities are drawn to different elements of what they should and shouldn't be doing. But if you were to take it a step further beyond drawing a comparison, like when you think about the thought process of Kobe and its impact on you, it's not just oh, Kobe was competing, I'm competing, or I was competing, or whatever. It's there's more to it than that. Can you flesh that out a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll paint with broad brushstrokes, and then we can pick and choose which ones to get deeper on. So first of all, there's just the straight up work ethic. Like he worked harder than anybody else, and he had legends like Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Elgin Baylor, like these legends who are in the Hall of Fame. They've got their jerseys retired. Like they've watched Kobe work out. They're like, this guy is different. And he's once, explained on various different interviews, like specifically, like if someone, for instance, wakes up at like 9, right? And then they start working out in 10, and they put in a workout 10 to 12, and then they have to break to eat and rest. And they go back in the gym from like, 2 to 4, and then you got to rest and recover again. And then you eat dinner, you're back in the gym like, 7 and 9. So that's like 6 hours, 6 to 8 hours, if you can squeeze something in like that. And then he was like, well, if you turn that on its head, if you wake up at 3, you got like way more hours. And then if you just keep up that consistency over time, there's no way anybody else can compete with you, because like they're so far behind, over years of hard work ethic and practice. There was like this other example of, Jay Williams, who's another NBA player, who was, I believe, visiting the Lakers. And so, they work out at the gym a few hours before tip off. And Kobe was there, and, he was already working out by the time Jay had started his workout. He was still working out when Jay left. And so, they meet up after the game. I think the Lakers win. And afterward, he goes up to Kobe and asks him, like, dude, you were working out before and after, my workout, my warm up. Like, what was going through your head? Like, why were you doing that? And Kobe's answer was, yeah, I kept working out because I saw you were working out. So I wanted you to see that I was working harder than you. So, so that's kind of like the first element, is just like, brute force. Another element, I think, is like the intelligence and the deep mental thinking. Like you mentioned, some people just, don't think about it, or they're not really conscious or mindful of the effort that they're putting in. And so there's like the element of not just working harder, but working smarter, right? And like Kobe wanted to know, like, everything, like why certain offenses work, why certain, footwork positions work the way they did. I mean, he also played in a certain basketball system, like the triangle offense, with Tex Winter and Phil Jackson. And so, he was put in a great system where he could flourish and learn, so many intricacies of basketball. So, that also inspired me to, not just like work hard, but to like take that extra step and think about like, why is it working? Why is a certain thing that I'm studying the way it is? So for instance, like right now in my present career, I'm working in the, law field. It's not just thinking about, like why a certain law works the way, or just understanding the mechanics. Like I feel a lot of lawyers do, but also just like think that extra step about like, what is exactly the law trying to achieve? Like, what are the policies behind that law? Something like that.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, no, I totally want to go deeper. I think I want to start with the brute force component because that's one that it's the easiest one because it's the most straightforward, right? And it's usually, defined by, for most people, defined by, how little sleep did you get last night? uh, and I think, we've talked about this in the past. And I'm someone who, so right after I graduated college, I was working, or soon after, or whatever, it was a little um, interlaid with one another, but I was working in DC, and I would wake up at like 4 or 4:30. I would drive into the city. I would work out at the gym, get changed, dressed, and whatnot. Go to work. I would be at work early, and I was getting my master's at the same time. I'd work on like a paper or whatever, class reading, and then I would work all day. And then after work, I would either have a class, have a paper, or I would go play soccer. And then I would get home at like maybe 9 o'clock was like early, but I had some late games and get home at like 10:30 or 11 and go to bed and then wake up at 4:30, go to the gym. And I was doing that. And I was even, between everything going on between work and the office and soccer and whatnot, like I was doing that six, often 7 times, 7 days a week. And so and that lasted for about a year and a half, 2 years, maybe, give or take. Elements changed, but kind of the same deal there. And I was in a lot of ways brute forcing it. Now I enjoyed it, and I had a lot of energy doing it. I wasn't like just dragging myself along all the time. But what I found out about, or what I ran into about 2 years, 2.5 years in, is like I got super burned out. And that doesn't mean that it's just like I went from doing all that to being on the couch, but I definitely was like, I'm not getting enough sleep. Like my body was suffering. Like I was having a hard time with energy, and like it was easier to be sick for longer, which I pretty much never get sick. And so just a number of things like that I noticed. And so I took a step back, and I had a couple injuries from like soccer and working out and stuff. And so I took a step back, and that step back, like I was only going to do it for like 6 months, and then it turned to a year, and then it was like 2 years. And even so now to this day, what, 3 4 years later, or 3 years later, I guess, I'm still not at that same, like I totally crank out at 110 miles an hour. But I've been, I try and build more and more consistency. And so I'm curious why you think, or if you think, I guess why. I'm curious why you think Kobe was able to maintain his crazy brute force schedule for years and years and years on end. Now, I'm sure he had, took time to relax and all that kind of stuff, but he still is, or was, operating at a much higher level than someone is, even like in my position, with all the ideas and concepts that I have going on and at your level. And do you feel like that's a personality thing? Do you think that there's an element to that's a component of just who he was made to be in a lot of ways? And that's not to say there aren't elements that can be learned and trained and practiced, but you know, is it really just the learn, train, and practice elements that set the Kobe's I just listened to a podcast with Michael Phelps and Adam Grant. And is it just the crazy work ethic that's just, based on who they are able to be, or is it something they practice? Like, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on all that?
Yeah, that's something that I thought about. I think first off, I think it's got to be in him, right? And it's so rare, and like it's almost impossible that somebody would have been able to sustain that level of involvement without, being predisposed to that. That's probably not developed super well because, that's like psychoanalysis. That's my personal opinion. There's a reason why there's only one Kobe, there's only one Michael Jordan, etc. But I also don't think that's a very useful inquiry, because we're all humans, we all make mistakes. And, in one area or another, we all have, weaknesses, we all have something to work on. It just so happened that wasn't really something Kobe struggled with or Michael struggled with. But there are certainly other areas that they were challenged. And, for us on the outside, looking at their stories, like it doesn't really, I mean, it's certainly good to be honest and to acknowledge that, like there are times where, to be honest, in high school, for those 4 years, I worked my butt off. Like I worked harder than probably any other member of my club, harder than, a good chunk of, most other competitors in the league, I would think. And then I got to college and I got super burned out. Partly because I kind of knew what I wanted to do going into college, or at least I thought I knew what I wanted to do, which was, get involved in, either the law or some sort of politics, policy, working on the Hill. That's partly why I moved from California to Virginia. And I couldn't do that. I was told I had to basically, spend 4 years studying US history or psych or philosophy.
The liberal arts.
Yeah, exactly. Physics, right? Like, I did not, sign up for 4 years to learn about Newtonian equations of force. So there has been a time where, I've had to accept for myself that, like, maybe in certain activities I can work harder than everybody else, but like, I am not Kobe, I'm not Michael Jordan, and I shouldn't try to be, right? So going back to your question, what I think was unique about Kobe was, like, he's talked before about good muses versus bad muses. So it's like the inspiration. He had a really strong why for why he wanted to get up at 3 every morning, or in some cases, play games without sleep. On the good, like the good muse side, like there is like this short film that he made, which is Dear Basketball. I'm pretty sure it won a Grammy, or not a Grammy, an Oscar. And like, he just talks about like how much he loves the game. Like he loves the sound of the ball hitting the floor in an empty arena. He loved the smell and the feel of the leather, right? Like there's just so much about the game. Like it's a beautiful game, and I think if he didn't have that, like it wouldn't be the same, right? And there is also the bad muse side, which I feel like doesn't get talked a whole lot about. There are times like in the 2003-2004 court case, right, against him, where it was a sexual assault case. I mean, he's talked about that before. He's talked about all the times when people, in opposing stands have, shouted things at him, where they're all booing, like all gives him energy. And so there's almost like a light energy versus a dark energy type of thing, kind of like a Marvel-esque vibe going on here. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think he fed off of both of those. And so there were the times where, he got up at 3 a.m. because he wanted to get better at the game. And there's also the times he got up at 3 a.m. because he knew, for instance, Allen Iverson just got 50 the last night, and there's no way he was letting Allen Iverson beat him. And so he was getting up at 3 a.m. because he wanted to work harder than that guy across the country.
So what do the rest of us do? And a thought that came to mind as you were talking was, and it's the concept of having a why, right? Which, in a lot of ways has been championed by Simon Sinek, and there are a lot of elements to that, and it's a very big concept. A lot of people talk about it and things like that. And it's been kind of interesting for both of our journeys, because I actually feel like what we perceived to be our why and has changed over time. And our trajectory that we were pursuing has changed over time. And that's not to say that we're not that we were less, I don't know if lucky is the right word, but less lucky than say Michael Jordan or Kobe or whoever, right? Because they had like more or less one singular why, right? Be good at this game and get paid for this game, and so I feel like in some ways that's probably where a lot of people, and I know that we've been through this, that's where a lot of people run into um, issues in their life, whether it's in college, whether it's, early 20s crisis or midlife crisis or millennial crisis or, whatever it is. And I feel like in a lot of ways, that's what is being, that's what's causing it. And there are some elements there where it's like, hey, part of it is probably being driven by having a broader understanding of the world than you did when you were a kid. And a lot of people kind of go through like oh my gosh, this is not what I was expecting to have to interact with as an adult. I wasn't even thinking about this in terms of, there are a lot of negative things in the world. And so one of the things I was talking yesterday with a friend who I've known since like high school. And one of the things that we were talking about was just our past and talking through different circumstances and how you can look back, or I, at least in my life, can look back and see how, each one from when I was like a tiny little kid to the next, to the next, to the next has like made me stronger and better, stronger and wiser and more mature. And I think that there's an element to that where I think your why and the pursuit of your why is connected to your journey, right? And I think for a lot of us, and as in the vast majority of us, our why and our journey, or our journey is more of our why than our why being about our journey, which I feel like is Kobe, his why was about his journey. Whereas I feel like my journey is about my why, because I'm still discovering elements of my why. And I'm still figuring out like what that's supposed to mean. And that translates to that, going through that process translates to it being hard to wake up in the morning sometimes. Like if I know I can do everything that I need to do in a day and it doesn't really matter, it's not a big deal, and I could do it today, I could do it in the morning, I could do it in the afternoon, or I could do it 3 days from now, nothing really matters, right? Why not just, lay in bed and scroll through Instagram or whatever, right? And I think that becomes like the big question of like, how do I solve for that in my life? And we've both gone through substantive elements of not figuring that out, trying to figure it out, and replacing it. And I was even thinking just, I think it was this morning, but I was just thinking, and I've thought this before, but just how through different elements of my life, I've relied on different components of things to give me energy, right? And give me drive and provide like an outsourced income of a vision, essentially. And in college, it was the pursuit of the trajectory that I wanted to do, right, with paramilitary counterterrorism, right? And then it translated a little bit, and for a long time, like I watched a ton of soccer, and I just enjoyed the beauty of the game. There's a lot of cool things about that. And then, especially when I was like working out and going all the time, it was like motivational YouTube videos, right, things like that. And then it kind of shifted to a little bit more of philosophic based, but still motivational type videos. And, we've shared plenty of them back and forth over the years. Right. And then it shifted a little bit more, even like 2 years ago when I was like at this new company, there was a lot going on. I was like, hey, this is opening up a whole new world to me in a lot of ways. And I can, start enjoying soccer and things like that. And then, today it's like none of those things have the same impact on me that they did at that time. And so I think to circle it back to kind of the thought that have been having is how does one go about trying to, or the question, how does one go about trying to figure out how to keep themselves moving while they're on their journey, right? And I think part of the illusion of success or happiness is connected to, hey, once I reach my why, I'll be happy. But for all we know, that journey could last, our entire lifetime, right? And that's just the type of life that we were meant to live. And there's like nothing to take away from that. That doesn't mean we're not having huge impact on the people around us, huge impact in our communities and our families, our friends, and colleagues. And then through the work that we're doing all the way down the line, no matter how small it is, it's impacting the world in some way. And so you have to, I think to some extent or other, you have to be prepared for that to be the answer. Because if all you're doing is wanting to have a why, then I think you are distracting yourself from finding meaning in what you're doing in the moment, which might be what is supposed to, be where you're finding meaning. And it's distracting and pulling you away from that. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? I threw out a lot there, but
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm used to it. So one thing that I've gotten, I guess, is like, maybe it sounds cliche, but just like really not to stop dreaming. Um, it- it's one thing Kobe said at the end of his life was like, it's really the journey that matters and not as much the destination, even though all of us obviously want to get to the destination. But it's the even if we don't have a why, we still have a why. And I can speak for, I think, both you and I, like the object of our career desires, our relationship desires, our family desires, all of that has evolved over the years. But what hasn't evolved is our desire to achieve greatness. I'm not talking about like a self-centered, like I am great, but like we don't want to just settle, right? We want to have great careers. We want to change the world still. We want to impact our communities. We don't want to just settle into like a marriage where we'd rather both be out. Like we both want to be like in love with our ladies and vice versa, all of that. And I think especially for a lot of for myself and for a lot of our colleagues who are quarter life crisising, there's really a temptation to let that go, because we are transitioning into adulthood. And so yeah, like just don't let go of the dreams, because that is what drives us, right? Going back to like how I apply things that I've seen from Kobe's life to myself. Kobe's last championship. Well, first of all, when he and Shaq were together, right, they won 3 straight, 2000, 2001, 2002. And then Shaq left. And people were saying, yeah, Kobe kicked Shaq out. I'm not going to revisit that sports debate here. But like both of them have since acknowledged for the longest time, they were trying to win without each other to prove to the world, right? Or if you ask certain people, like just to stoke the fire a little bit, so anyway, Kobe didn't win again until 2009. And, in 08 was the first time he made the finals again, since Shaq left. And they lost. They got blown out in game 6 by the Boston Celtics. And I think the score was something ridiculous, like 160 to 120s. It was like a 40-point blowout. They were celebrating on the floor before the game was done. They lost in Boston, so they had to walk out with drooped heads, confetti all over them, right? So like that was a heartbreaker, but he got back up. He recommitted to training, to becoming a leader, to making his teammates the best that they could, and they won 2 more. Still, 2010 was the last championship that he won. And he kept trying to get back, riddled by injuries, teammates injuries, teammates not doing well. I think around 2013, 2014, like they started plummeting. Like their record was like one of the worst in the West. And then he got an Achilles tear. Like almost no athlete comes back from an Achilles tear and maintains their prior form. Though maybe Kevin Durant is breaking that today. But like he asked himself, like, do I want to, like, that was the first time that I ever heard him acknowledge that he wasn't sure if he even wanted to come back to basketball, right? Because like he knew he could, but it was such a high mountain. So he ultimately decided that he wanted to leave on his terms, not because of an Achilles tear, which is again very Kobe-esque. And I, respect him tremendously for that. And I think 2016 was his last season. It was his 20th, and the Lakers did not have a winning record. But in his last game, he dropped 60. Like, what other athlete retires at 20 years dropping 60? And so even though that wasn't a huge, like it wasn't the Cinderella fairy tale, like he wins coming back from an Achilles, wins a championship, the city goes wild. I mean, that's still something that I can look to and think, like, I mean, I don't have an Achilles tear, right? Like, if there's something that I'm working through, it's mental or it's relational or it's, a situation, an abstract situation, like abstract situation that I put myself in. I am not physically hurt, right? I'm not physically incapable of getting to where I want to get to. And if they can do it, why the heck should I count myself out? So that's like, does that answer the question? That like, that's part of what, that's part of what gets me up in the morning. Yeah, like, again, even if we don't have a particular why, we do have a why. And that why is bettering ourselves, and like, I know both of us have spoken at length about, the relationship factor, right? And I mean, that's another aspect that gets me out of bed in the morning. Like, I could very easily, for things that we'll maybe get into later today or another day, like, there have been things that happened in the last, 2-3 years of my life where I really could have just stayed in bed all day. I had to take time off of law school. And so, I was in a position where I saw all my friends graduate first. I didn't, and I was left behind almost. So, but at the end of the day, I think about the kind of person that I dream of becoming and the kind of person that I see myself with, right? And I want to be the kind of person that my dream person is attracted to, right? So that's another thing that gets me out of bed in the morning.
No, I totally think that's awesome. That's definitely in line with some things that I was thinking, and I like the drawing the connection between Kobe's journey and he's on his path, and there are elements that held him back, right? He ran into struggles on his path, right? And we're on our path and we're running into our version of said struggles. And I really liked the dreaming thing, because something I was thinking about, it was about a month ago, but I was actually thinking about one of the things that I feel like have one. I was thinking about my dad and my grandpa, my grandpa passed away at the end of last year, and my dad's dad. And I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, one of the things that stood out to me about both of them, and that I feel like kept them going for so long. Like, my grandpa had, I think by the time he died, I think he was going on like 17 or 18 years of heart issues, and he had like 4 or 5 open heart surgeries, which at the time was like basically unheard of. Like, just like kept going, and like was running a chainsaw,
Yeah.
even after. And so, like, but one of the things that stood out to me, or has stood out to me, is that they, like, right up into the end, like, my grandpa was a dreamer. And I was like, that's exactly how I was thinking of it and putting it to myself. And it wasn't always about like his life, at the end, he was dreaming about how my parents' ministry could be super successful, and dreaming about how their book was going to impact people. And like, he always had that as an element of, what he was doing in a lot of ways. And then I feel like the same can be said for my dad, like, and to use like a completely different type of example. It's like, my dad will like drive by a piece of real estate and be like, oh man, like, what could we do with this? And he's dreaming about like what could be done with a piece of real estate. And he's not in real estate, but like, that's an outflow of this kind of like dreaming mentality. And I was thinking about how important I feel like that is. And so that's so cool that you brought that up because we hadn't talked about that. um,
Yeah,
but
totally, man. It's like almost, you know, I guess another thing that came to mind is I think we both talked about the content that we consume. You know, like I remember when I was like, you know, 10 and like I got my first computer game, right? And my mom got an egg timer and she's like, okay, I'm going to give you 20 minutes per day. You can play your computer game for 20 minutes a day, set the timer at 20 minutes. It seems so long. It was like the thing I looked forward to every day. And you know, here I am now with like my iPhone alerts, you know, your screen time was down 17% from last week, 13 hours. Like, oh geez.
yeah,
Right. So anyway, we both talked about like being more meaningful with that content, right? If we are spending like 13 hours of our waking day on that. And, you know, like I've, you know, really been inspired by a lot of other young people. And, you know, not to put aside, you know, the older generation at all, but I'm talking about, you know, maintaining the dream and like just realizing that there are other young people out there that are pursuing their dreams, you know, that are overcoming adversity, a lot of adversity in many cases. And, you know, like, you know, why not me, right? Why not us? I think it's really important, especially with, you know, COVID. It feels really isolating at this moment. There's not a whole lot of social events going on. Even if people are going to social events, they're getting slammed for going to social events, right? So yeah, that's super important.
yeah. Well, and so I feel like the follow up to that is, and I think a serious component of no matter where you're at in your journey, no matter who you are, is I think you have to, and again, this is just my opinion, but I think to some extent or another, whatever it looks like for you, you have to decide the type of person that you want to be, and then you have to go execute on that. And and we've talked about this in some ways before, where it's, you know, and I've said this before, it doesn't matter even if you're not consciously deciding who you want to be. By not deciding it, you are deciding who you want to be, right? Because you are on a trajectory one way or the other. And so I think Kobe's an example of someone who he decided he wanted to be really good at this game, right? He knew who he wanted to be. And then there are, like, to go back even way further in history, though not that long ago, don't forget, it's not actually that long ago, but Winston Churchill in World War II, right? He knew, like, as a kid, basically, who he, or I mean, maybe young adult, knew who he wanted to be. And in some ways, he totally achieved that. In other ways, it got away from him. And, but he was always following principles that he'd set up for himself, and whether they were personal or professional, et cetera. And that I think that might be what people are trying to tap into when they say things like "be true to yourself," right? I think the problem with that is like it becomes kind of vague, because of course you should be true to the good things of yourself and your good strengths and things like that, but you should also be aware of the fact that you have weaknesses and maybe shortcomings, or bad habits, or, you know, bad aspects of your personality, or whatever it is that you should be working on, right? And so you shouldn't just be true to whatever it is that exists, right, automatically within you. It's like you should be true to the things that you believe are important to who you want to be as a person and what you want to do. And that's where I think, you know, for me and for you, it's we know the type of person we want to be in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And while we don't necessarily always know like what tomorrow's step should be, we know that, you know, consuming a quality piece of content, right, is better than scrolling through Instagram for an hour, right, which is easy to do. And I think that there are like those, that's where I try, and the way that I try and break down my life and mentality and how I approach it is, if I know that a certain move would be better than another move, whether it's you know, even if that means like not doing something, right? Even that means taking you know, a couple hours to go outside and have a cigar and read my book, right? Or whatever it is, but that's still better than having a cigar and scrolling through Instagram, right? And it's still better than going to bed and sleeping for 3 hours, even if I'm like not tired, right? So there's like always steps to that. And that's, I think a lot of people hear that and have heard that and feel that I'm being, like too Spartan in my approach. And I think the breakdown there is like, that's like, you have to understand like that decision matrix, right, is based on my decision of who I want to be, right? Which is connected to my personality, which is connected to the good that I want to do in the world and the positive impact that I want to have. Like, so to me, it's like that isn't, it isn't Spartan in a negative way. It's progressive in building the foundation and the pyramid of my life. And so like, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but that's kind of how my approach and how I think about the uh, achieving and working towards the dream versus it just existing, and then also maintaining some semblance of progress even when I feel like I'm not making progress in wherever I'm at, in my why or in my journey towards my why, etc.
Yeah. So I guess a little bit of background for our viewers on me, like you probably already know this, but I'm quite an all or nothing person, right? Like it's not too bad to ask me to wake up at like 4:30 for 1 week straight. But then if you ask me to wake up at like 6:30 consistently, like in perpetuity, I'm like, you want me to wake up at 6:30 forever? Right. And so like when it comes to attending class, like if I got a great professor and I really believe in the mission, like what I'm learning, we're talking about transferable skills, I am all there. Like you have me not only 8 to 5, but like I will study before bed, I will study during meals, I will study in the morning. But then like if I'm not really getting it, maybe I won't even attend class, so like again, this is something that I've worked on. I no longer cut class, I no longer cut class at the end of my school career. But it's that is consistency is something that I struggle with as a personality trait. And so when you talk about what you were talking about, the Spartan mentality, yeah, like I totally get that, because I think from people on the outside, they're there with you in terms of thinking like, obviously, yeah, they do want to better themselves, but then they're a little scared when they think about like, every moment mattering. What does that mean then, that like I can't spend even 20 minutes on Instagram? Does that mean I can't even watch a free YouTube video just because I want to, like just for the heck of it? Right. And like that's the same fear that I had when, my mom always told me as a kid, oh, you should go plan. And I'd like plan out every minute. And then after a week, I'd get scared because I'd be like, this, I feel like I'm in a straitjacket. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's some to elaborate on the Spartan mentality, right? It's not to say that you can't have any fun, but rather that you should have fun consciously, even if it's going to be a block of time that you say you're going to be subconscious, like to think ahead of time. For instance, from time to time, I just want to have an afternoon off, maybe even a whole day off, right? Like where I just want to, watch sports or watch esports with you, or, game or something like that, or take a really long walk or hike. I already know from experience that I don't want to spend X amount of time doing that. Like I don't want to spend, just if I get home at, 6:30, I don't want to, sit down on my couch, look up and it's 9:30 and all I've been doing is watching TV. Right. I already know I don't want to make that decision, but I also know I probably need a little bit of time to like, decompress. And so I decide what amount of time would I be comfortable spending. And so like, okay, 7:30, 8, okay. And then I just, block that out. That's my subconscious time, right? Like I'm not really thinking until the timer goes off, and then it's back to the, back on schedule. So I think people misinterpret what it means to live intentionally, and they think that it means having your foot on the gas pedal the entire time, and that's not what it means. It just means answering to yourself, being your own boss, and asking like, what I'd be happy with today in terms of progress and how I spent my time. Um, I saw the other day on Facebook or Instagram, there was like a life calendar, which, like in every calendar, there's, a list of the months and you can cross off the months as it goes, except this is like the average calendar, a few long sheets with like the average life expectancy of the American adult. So like, 75 years, 80 years. And then it's like, you cross off how many years you've lived. And it's like scary, man, because you look at that and like you're looking at death. And I'm not the kind of person that like thinks about death a whole lot and entertains suicidal thoughts, just me personally. But like we have had a lot of loss. The public has had a lot of loss recently, especially with COVID. Like Kobe passing away right before COVID. And I personally work in the trusts and estates field, so there's a lot of death that I have to deal with in my line of work. So that's just kind of something additionally that I thought about. Like I don't have much time left. Like I hope I have a long and full and happy life and all that, but in the grand scheme of things, none of us has that much time. Like we don't live until we're 150, right? So what do I want to experience? How do I want to be remembered afterward? But mostly like, what do I want to do? What do I want to contribute with the time that I have? Because I'll never get that back, right? And sometimes that means applying myself, building good habits, spending more time with family, and sometimes to achieve those longer term goals, it means maintaining sanity by decompressing. And so I guess it's to say decompress, but maintain the consciousness of why you're decompressing in the grander scheme of things. So that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So where would you say as of today, right? Because it's kind of an ever progressing circumstance for us, but where would you say you're at in your mentality as of today? Strengths, weaknesses, what's currently on your mind relative to mentality?
I'm at a solid 62%. Well, I mean, it's hard to quantify, right? Like, I feel like I'm in a healthier state of mind. I'm not completely, to be completely honest, I'm not where I want to be in terms of the career yet. Like, I don't have my law license yet. I hope to have it soon in a few months. So
let's go.
Right. Yes, let's go. So it's kind of in a holding pattern right now, but like I can still there are things that I can think about, in terms of like what fields of law do I eventually want to get there? Like how do I want to prepare myself in terms of what am I reading? What kind of continuing education can I invest myself in to be prepared for those types of law? Like for instance, if I'm one thing that I'm interested in currently, and I think I share this interest with you, is like business and entrepreneurship, right? I think we approach that right now from slightly different angles. Like you're more on the, the actual building a business side. I'm approaching it more from an interest side, but also like I know my skills are more on the legal side, the detail-oriented aspects, as opposed to grand strategy, which is kind of like, the things you bring to the table. And so, if I want to, get involved in like mergers and acquisitions, like, I better know what I'm talking about, so there's a degree of stuff that I won't know until I'm in it. Right. But there are things that I can learn right now while I have time. So, I'll invest in myself. I'll put in the time to learn what I can right now.
Gotcha. Okay. And then if you think about where you're at in your mentality relative to something like mental health, right? Where would you say you're at?
I mean, I think again, I think I'm at a healthier state now. And part of that is because I have tried to surround myself with good people, you included. I take time out to like, invest in my faith and, my family and that kind of thing. So yeah, just being out and not, staying indoors and confining myself to, like not letting the echo chamber resonate too much is good.
Gotcha. Yeah. It's so for me, that's always a hard question because I'm happy, right? I live a happy life. I'm blessed with a lot of things and in a lot of ways, but there's like almost never a moment, I can relax and step outside of my world for like a very short time, very, very short, but inevitably and generally speaking, very consistently, I exist in a state of, I want to do more. I want more. I want more. I want more. And I want to be engaged more. I want to be working harder. I I want this like high octane existence. But the thing is I found there to be a dichotomy between that emotion in a lot of ways and how I choose to execute in my life. It's like yesterday is a great example. It's like I woke up, I've been waking up early, just like naturally, but I don't like do anything serious or substantive like for a few hours. I'm like, right. And then it's like, okay, day starts to happen. And then it's like, oh, I hung out with a friend. That was like really, really good time. And then I was like, all right, I got to do laundry. I got to, work on some candle stuff. I got to, what was the other thing I had to do? I had to do some cleaning, do dishes, stuff like that. And I don't think I did any of it. Now that isn't me. And that is, it's like, all right, Britton, like, what's wrong with you? If you want to achieve X, then you kind of have to do Y. And that's something. And I think part of that comes from, for me, that comes from a sense of not being totally sure of the direction that I wanted to take with different things. And like the candle company is an easy one. It's like, hey, I need to work on 2 new scents. It's like, well, all right, which 2 new scents? I gotta mix the scents. I gotta make the scents. I would rather just have the scents and bang the scents out and like go, right? And that's not how it works. And part of that's a personality thing. And then part of it is like a discipline thing. And one of the things I've noticed in myself, and I'm working on an esports business as well, or a concept. It's not really business, and it won't be for a little bit, but I'm working on that. And I spent a lot of time, I'll spend hours researching, watching content, taking notes, having conversations with people. Right. But then it's like, hey, it's time to, find somebody to help us with some no code development. Right. And it's like, that's all that happens. Nothing. And it's, take me 10 minutes to just go post an ad on Upwork, say, hey, this is what I'm looking for. This is what the situation is. Anybody out there. Right. And I would totally probably, potentially, get a hit, but like, why have I not done that yet when I should have been I could have done that 2 weeks ago. Right. And like, and so that's a lack in my mentality that I've been noticing lately. And I've been trying to think, but I think there's an element too where I can get too intellectual about it and sit there and be like, well, at least I'm thinking about it. So that means I'm making progress, right? It's like, nah, you already know what you should be doing, which is you should, block out 30 minutes, block out an hour, whatever it is, and just focus and do the work. And that's one of the things I've noticed is it's, especially during quarantine and things like that, it's actually really hard to focus because, I've got a screen here, TV over there, my phone right here, I can listen to whatever, I can watch whatever, I can sort of work on another thing. It's like, oh, and then it's like, I got 2 hours of nothing. I can go hang out on my balcony, when it's not freezing. It's so easy to get away from not being focused. And part of the reason that I found that difficult, we're going a little bit different direction here, but part of the reason I found that difficult is because I feel like every time I try and be super focused, something in life comes up and throws everything off the rails. It's like, I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. I'm going to go to bed at 9 a.m. 3 days later, hey, Britton, we're going to go get drinks with a bunch of professional colleagues. It's like good context to have. And we're starting at 8:30, it's like, it's like, I just had this plan, how am I supposed to execute on this plan? And that's a balance I've been trying to figure out for a long time. And, and I think the answer has to come down into kind of like essentially micromanagement and micro discipline, which is instead of trying to be disciplined across the big board, or across the whole board, it's more a function of, if I say no to this, going out and doing something with a friends or whatever it is, if I say no to X, then I better make sure that I am filling that time with what I should be doing with X, Y, and Z, right? And instead of just saying, well, I said no so that I could be free to focus on the things that I want to do, but then not actually following through on that, because then I'm shorting the experience that I could and or should have had, and I'm also shorting myself of making progress in the things that I have told myself are important to me, and things that I want to achieve. And so that's kind of where I've been at lately.
Yeah, well, I don't know, Britton, why aren't you getting those things done? Come on, you got to put your foot to the
I'm a
pedal.
lazy loser.
Yeah, well, so I guess my thought on that is, first of all, we all need to give a little grace to ourselves. And again, we're not perfect, and we're not supposed to be, putting our foot to the pedal. And there's like a fine line between, doing something because we want to better ourselves, and doing something because we're guilting ourselves into doing it because we feel like we should be doing it in order to better ourselves. So, you know, I found that operating from a perspective of guilt, it just doesn't help, right? So there's that. There's also a factor of, like just lining up the small things and just knocking them all out at once. So, if you got to do the dishes, and, and you don't want to do it right now, that's totally fine. But, there should be, sort of a list that you just bang out. That could be one, possible intervention. And then, when you were talking about the 9 to 5 thing, I guess that's one example of competing priorities, where obviously you want to go to bed at 9 and get up at 5 for a reason, but not because you want to do that in and of itself. It's because you wanted to get something done in the morning, or you want to build good habits. And then on the other hand, like building contacts, going out with, networking contacts, friends for drinks at 8:30. That's another good, right, that you want to have. And so like you just kind of sometimes need to decide between those two, and ask yourself why is it that you wanted to get up at 5 a.m. the next morning? And sometimes that has to, give.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like the hard part there, even from a mentality processing standpoint, is you get, or I get, I guess, torn between what is a habit I want versus a good that I want. Right. And that's where it can kind of be tricky and annoying. But hey, someday maybe I'll be the captain of my own ship, and I'll be like, look, guys, 8:30 doesn't work. 6:30, be there. Too bad.
Maybe. Only time will tell.
Yeah. But anyway, okay. The only other thing I was thinking about, we can wrap this up, but the only other thing I was thinking about was, and we touched on it a little bit, but it's just trying to maintain a positive outlook, because we both have experienced a lot of negative things just in life in general, and that's not to set us apart. I think everyone has, and I think there's an element to a choice and a practice and a habit, etc., of trying to maintain and a focus on trying to maintain a positive, happy attitude. Because I think being negative, being down on yourself or the people around you or whatever it is, circumstances around you, is not setting you up for positive thinking and a positive mentality. And that's the other major part of a mentality. Maybe it's the third element of what you were kind of first addressing off the rip, from Kobe, is, there's the brute force part, just put in the hard work, right? And then there's a strategy component, trying to figure out what and how you should be working on it. And then there's also, I feel like, a positive mentality, because no matter how hard you're brute forcing it, sometimes you can't make it work. Sometimes you get the Achilles, torn. And then no matter how much strategy you have, hey, I'm waking up at 5, I'm going to bed at 9, sometimes something comes up and you can either let it ruin, your experience from 8:30 to, 11 or whatever. And, or you can let it affect you for the next 3 days in terms of just having a negative part of your thinking and taking away from the life that you are living in the moment. And so that's not to say people don't go through hard times. That's not to say you can and never should be negative or pejorative or properly assessing what isn't a helpful or healthy or good or right situation. It's important to be true to what is true, but at the same time, maintaining just a positive outlook is, in my opinion, is another huge part, because it's the element that gets you through when things don't go right, when things don't go wrong, or when things do go wrong. It's, you have to reassess and reset, and you can't really reassess and reset from a negative standpoint, or at least very easily or very well, and certainly not as successfully, because it inhibits you from learning, in my opinion.
For sure. Yeah, it's important to believe in yourself. And maybe this is something, going back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, talking about the inspirations that we have, the heroes that we look up to. What I'm about to say is probably something that, you can't take my word for it, because, I haven't completely made it yet. I'm only 26, and I'm still trying to achieve it myself. So, I would say, look up to your own heroes. For myself, I look up to Kobe when he said, like, if something is not working out, right? Like, it's quite easy to just say, like, point to whatever external circumstance, any external circumstance, that whether or not it's within your control, and point to that as the reason for why you're not achieving the degree of success you wanted to. And, for him, he basically said, that just sounds like a whole bunch of excuses, right? If you want it bad enough, you got to make it work. And you got to find a way. Like that's a reason why I, going to a different source of inspiration. That's why I love movies like The Martian. At the end, where Matt Damon is like, at some point you're just going to think, this is the end. Like, this is how I'm going out. And, I've certainly had that thought at times, like, is my career over? Like, am I ever going to amount to anything? Am I going to be the 30-year-old living in my mom's basement? Right. And after you get over that initial shock, it's time to get to work. Right. As he said, you do the math, if you get enough things right, you get to come back home. Right. And I feel like, whether or not, nothing is guaranteed in life. We all know that. And, like, success isn't guaranteed in life. But at some point, we have to just determine for ourselves, we're not going to give up, right? We're going to keep on finding a way to make that dream come true. And we're just not going to give up. We're not going to, turn around and say, blame an external circumstance. And, for me, and I think you as well have decided, even if success doesn't come, I would rather have gone out trying, rather than just, turning over, laying, exposing my stomach, just laying in bed, wasting away, wondering what could have been. That's just a decision that I make for me. That's the person that I want to be.
Yeah. Well, and I think the only thing I'm going to add to what you're saying is at the first part, when Kobe's saying, like, look, if you want it, then you have to, you have to put in the work. If you want it badly, right? And I think it's the only thing I'll add to that is it's also okay to not want something, right? It's okay to be at peace with where you're at. It's okay to be happy with the trajectory that you're on. Like, there's nothing wrong with that either. Like, you're still a serious, substantive, and important part of the community, right? As a whole and at large. And that's still, like, a good and positive place to be. And I think a lot of us will go through phases of that, and then we'll go through phases of the other, and there's an ebb and flow to it. So
For sure.
Cool. Awesome. Well, hey man, let's wrap this one up. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. This was fun. This was less interview-esque and more conversational, but I figured at least for now, it would be an interesting episode. So I hope you enjoyed, and please, leave a like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you are listening to this platform. We'll catch you next time.